What's an actual scientifically valid way an apocalypse could happen? Story 1. Don't listen to this if you don't want another reason to stay up at night. Seriously, this fact used to give me anxiety the first week I started thinking about it. So, during a lecture by my university physics teacher, he told us that every 100,000 years, Earth's magnetic field changes polarity. No biggie, it wouldn't hurt or harm us anyway, unless it changes the direction in which current flows in a circuit, which it will. Making any object remotely using an IC is basically unusable, like your smartphone, your car, your toaster, your microwave, your job's local computers, your global economy, nuclear warhead control circuits, etc. Are you scared now? Good, but I'm not done yet. You may be wondering when it'll happen next, so we can prepare. I mean, a change of polarity in a magnetic field must leave some mark we can track. We can locate black holes, send a man to the moon and back, and see the cosmic microwave background, basically, the first photons that we are physically able to see from a mere 380,000 years after the Big Bang, but not locate something as big as a change in polarity in our own magnetic field. And indeed, we can't. We don't know. It could happen tomorrow, in a week, in 2 years, 1,000 years. It may have happened when Volta crafted his first battery. We don't know. Nobody knows. Nobody will ever know until it's too late. Story 2. You guys, I live in the northwestern United States, and all day yesterday, the news was talking about a huge snowstorm headed our way. By last night, all of the local grocery stores had been raided. Milk, eggs, all the produce, batteries, gone. Costco was a mess as well. It doesn't take much for civilizations to lose their minds. An apocalypse can happen if a large event freaks enough people out to the point of destroying ourselves. Story 3. Influenza. There are 18 subtypes of hemagglutinin and 11 types of neuraminidase, and one combination could create a deadly strain that could wipe out humanity. We've already seen how deadly influenza can be from the 1918 H1N1 influenza virus, where 1/3 of the world population became infected and about 50 million people died. To put it in perspective, those 50 million dead, a conservative estimate, equaled about 3% of the global population. An equivalent modern influenza epidemic would inflict more than 2 billion and kill more than 210 million worldwide. That's 325 times more people than die from the regular yearly influenza. Story 4. Greater concentrations of carbon dioxide in the air could result in greater amounts of carbon dioxide being dissolved into the water, which is basically how you make carbonic acid, which will change the acidity of all bodies of water on the planet, which will, in turn, result in a change in the balance of the different types of plants and animals living in said water, which will in turn change, likely reducing, the amount of fish we can extract from the ocean. The increase in carbon dioxide will also change the rates of energy absorption from the sun and dissipation back into space, which will ultimately end up changing weather patterns, which have the potential to greatly reduce the crop yields in prime farmland, because they will no longer be prime farmland because the rain is falling elsewhere and the temperature ranges, duration, and timings will no longer be ideal for the crops grown. Both of these combined will mean a significant reduction in the amount of food that can be extracted from the environment using current methods and locations. It will take time to build new infrastructure and learn the new patterns. Reduced food production means famines. Famines mean desperation, and desperation means violence and conflict. Only these famines and this desperation will not be localized to a single geographic location or political bloc. This will be a worldwide phenomenon, as all farmlands and all fishing areas will be impacted. Worse, not all will be impacted equally, and if there's one thing that people hate, it's when their neighbors are doing better than themselves. Story 5. If you're talking about the collapse of civilization and regression back into an Iron Age type of existence, then the easiest way is a severe magnetic storm on the sun which causes a coronal discharge that hits the Earth. These happen, but we haven't had a severe one since the 1800s. This happened before electric power was a thing, but after telegraphs. I believe it caused telegraph machines to burst into flames and wreaked havoc with the overall system. If something like that happened today, it would destroy our electrical infrastructure. Basically, it would cause severe waves in the grid, which would destroy transformers. The transformers popping would themselves cause more severe interference, which would propagate through the system and destroy even more transformers. You'd have a chain reaction that could take down power grids across a continent or entire hemisphere, so thousands or tens of thousands of transformers destroyed, and the turnaround time to replace them, assuming you have the capability somewhere to actually manufacture new ones, would be decades. You'd have huge areas, say all of North America or all of Europe, without electric power for decades. Having the entire US without electricity for a week would collapse the country. No banking, no AC, no gasoline pumps, no food deliveries to cities, no prescription medicines, and no prospect for any of these for decades. People starve by the millions within a few weeks, from poor distribution at first, but a simple lack of capability later. How many people could the US feed without modern farming techniques? Certainly not 350 million Story 6 prions. They are proteins that are misfolded. It takes literally one to infect you. They can live in the soil for months, and the only way to be sure that you got them all is to burn that down. They are responsible for CJD, chronic wasting disease, scrapie, and a little number called mad cow. If you ingest one of these, you will die, slowly and painfully. Add one of these guys to anything that makes you run around and bite, and there's your apocalypse. Prions survive high temperatures, so good luck with that scorched earth plan. The most awful of prions is so-called fatal familial insomnia. There is no cure. You simply become unable to sleep. Your body aches, begs, cries out for sleep, but you can't provide it. Doctors can't place you into a coma. Sleep aids just make your sleepiness even worse. Worst part? It being a prion means it's nearly undetectable and can't be removed from cooking food. Yay! Story 7. Robots, Artificial Intelligence. Not talking about Skynet Terminator, at least not yet, but with self-driving cars on the rise, every driving job will be terminated. Then robots will take other jobs, and it's been calculated that 80% of jobs will be taken by robots who can do our jobs better and faster. Eventually, the majority of the people on the planet will be unemployed, broke, and homeless, while the 1% will be super rich. But then when AI takes control, they'll see how useless we are and take us out. Story 8. Absolute. False vacuum collapse. Gamma ray burst. Solar flare. Survivable. Probably. The moon finally escaping Earth's gravity. It's leaving already, several inches a year, and destroying the tidal lock. Global famine due to unprecedented drought, resulting in social collapse, war, and anarchy. There's a quote somewhere about 9 meals separating order from chaos. An EMP hitting the Earth, emitted by a starlight years away. Same principles as gamma ray burst, but wiping and destroying all magnetic records and digital technology instead. The world economy collapses and must exist in analog until digital infrastructure can be rebuilt. Not to mention, all vehicles built after 2004 or so are bricked until repair. All this assuming Russia doesn't decide the US did it, and both countries fire off the oldest submarine-based portions of their nuclear arsenal. Story 9, Gamma Ray Burst, GRB, and we won't see it approaching before it hits. Because X-rays are electromagnetic waves and therefore approach Earth with the speed of light, so their approach cannot be seen from a distance, since whatever light you may try to use to see it travels to Earth as fast as X-rays themselves. Story 10. Bacteria become resistant to antibiotics because we have overused them. Also, all the diseases we are vaccinated against, but new strains of it because there are anti-vaxxers out there. So if their kids get measles, the measles virus might mutate a little bit, and then suddenly it's a whole new strain. SpaghettiOs. Us running out of food, considering the global warming that makes it harder to grow food, and also the population is still growing. For all of you Swedish people, there's a really good podcast about all the ways Earth can end. It's called P3 Dystopia. Story 11, Climate Change. No, seriously, climate change could cause catastrophes quite easily. You can easily survive a few degrees hotter temperatures on average, but important microorganisms of our planet can't survive in the numbers they need to. Those little guys are the basis for the food chain of like 90% of the we eat. Climate change could very easily be a mass extinction event, and apex predators generally don't survive mass extinctions. They're just too far up the food chain. It is probably the most scientifically valid apocalyptic event we can conceive at this time. Story 12. Asteroids. There are billions of asteroids floating around in space, and NASA, along with other countries' space programs and observatories, can track something like 11% of the sky. Our planet has endured several large impacts, and it's probably safe to say something like that could happen in the future. While we're better prepared than the dinosaurs, a large impact could still devastate the planet in a situation that is described in popular movies like Armageddon and Deep Impact. While a large portion of our population could survive this impending strike, it could leave the planet temporarily or irrecoverably damaged. We are severely underprepared for the inevitable time in the future of our species when this planet may be uninhabitable or soon to be doomed. Think of the scientific leaps and bounds we will need to complete before we can survive in space for an extended period. We would need ways to transport hundreds of thousands of people light years away to find a suitable planet. Think of all the technology that would need to be invented or discovered to create a small scouting vessel capable of carrying 5 to 10 people light years away in a short enough time to guarantee they would be able to come back and report their finds before our planet failed. Then we would need to replicate that type of a vessel on a scale we have never attempted to carry a couple of thousand people across the galaxy. Oh, and the population of our planet is somewhere around 7.5 billion people. Good luck getting a ride out of Dodge. Story 13. Heard of an interesting one to do with AI and nanotechnology? In the far future, it is assumed that in order to rapidly construct large things, AI would be employed to utilize autonomous nanobots to deconstruct raw material and then rearrange that material into parts, construction materials, and then assemble them. The same process could be used to effectively get rid of something, say a whole planet. The concern is what happens if the AI can't tell the difference between what they're supposed to consume and what they're supposed to leave alone. Picture a locust-like swarm of nanobots deconstructing literally everything in its path down to its basic molecular components. This is called the gray goo scenario, if memory serves me right. Story 14. The extinction of bees. If we don't preserve and promote our current bee population, we're fucked. We as on the planet, not just humans. If they go extinct before we, as humans, come up with a human-produced alternative, the whole planet is screwed. Stop killing Hymenoptera, folks. Story 15. The cordyceps outbreak in The Last of Us actually has some pretty good scientific backing. If the cordyceps fungus evolved and moved up to take over mammals instead of insects, which they have a pretty good reason for, considering humans populate the entire Earth and are a lot more mobile than insects. If the cordyceps were then able to get into our food supply, as things such as chocolate and coffee come from South America, they could already hit a good 65-70% of the population. Story 16. Our entire society is ever more increasingly reliant upon computers. At some future time, a bad enough computer virus might destroy our society, leaving us with phones that don't work, planes that can't fly, power stations that cannot generate electricity, cars, trains, buses, trucks that can't drive, ATMs that cannot issue money, banks that don't know who their customers are or how much money that have, etc., etc. By then, we'll be so reliant upon automation that a lot of basic skills, like driving, possibly reading, farming, fishing, hunting, etc., will have disappeared for all except a few people who are regarded as laughable weirdos by the rest, and whatever countries are still backward enough not to have implemented it. The most advanced nations of the world would collapse within a week. What's more, the lack of basic skills would be so profound it's possible they might not be able to make a comeback for centuries or more, because there's no one left to learn from, no one can read anymore, and none of the electronic devices that have all the tutorials, explanations, demonstrations are working because of the virus. So, a computer virus, one day. Story 17. A single extinction level event that could kill all humans. A supervolcano wouldn't do it. That might trigger several smaller events and over time get the same result, but we're talking about a singular event. A virus outbreak wouldn't do it, because humans would isolate themselves to avoid the virus and kill all potential carriers rather than allow it to spread. An asteroid wouldn't do it. Even if it succeeded in creating an impact winter, humans are resilient. We've survived ice ages. Nuclear war wouldn't do it. There would be survivors and we'd eventually rise in numbers. Life finds a way. Since gamma-ray bursts don't form as often and are extremely rare in solar systems with stable amounts of heavy elements, that's likely to be our death, though Wolf-Rayet 104 has been on our radar for about a decade now. Solar flares are absorbed by our atmosphere and spread out like fire on an iron ball, dissipating heat so their damage is negligible. There is no single event that on its own could wipe out every human on this planet, and the most pressing matter on the planet today that could do this is a multifaceted event occurring right now: climate change. Though to be fair, the dinosaurs were not wiped out by a single event either, and some of them survived to create descendants that evolved into creatures we all know today. I believe we're seeing the start of what will ultimately end all mankind on Earth, and it's in nearly every single developed country on the planet. It's pervasive and insidious because people don't see it happening all around them until the numbers missing are in the millions. In countries with exploding populations, improved healthcare, hard workers, and equality amongst the sexes, raising a family is no longer a high enough priority to maintain population growth. Governments keep cutting back on programs that help families, which does not motivate people to take chances in this trying time with such an unstable economy and culture of cruelty. Countries all over the world are seeing their mortality rates going down, an increase in deaths and a decrease in births. The United States has seen its mortality rates drop for 3 years in a row now, in conjunction with a steady decrease in birth rates. This trend is not isolated to America, it is happening everywhere. Story 18. I've always admired Scott Westerfeld's Uglies book series for how realistic his dystopian future was to me. Basically, his universe revolves around the fact that a bacteria got created in a lab, I think, I'm not too sure about specific details, and got spread through the use of petrol. That bacteria contained in oil would in fact explode, making cars and other means of transportation fatal. And you know it. We're all very much dependent on oil. As such, anyone trying to travel to escape mayhem died, as they didn't know what the chase of all this was, be it by car, by plane, you name it. Only the people who just sat down and observed what was happening and how to resolve the problem managed to identify the issue and survive. That resulted in a really small post-apocalyptic society, generally smarter than average. It's a young adult series book, but I've always been amazed by how flawless this scenario is. How it relies on problems is very real to us, and with really specific and defined consequences, easily comprehensible. Story 19. If the bugs die, we die. Crop pollination. If the ocean dies, we die. Provides breathable air. If the ocean temperature changes too much, its temperature-driven currents might shut down, which could be the last straw and kill most of the remaining ocean life, and therefore us too. If global warming takes away too much farmland and drinkable water supplies, countries start to collapse, and mass migration of desperate people can domino over a formerly stable neighbor. The amount of instability, opportunism for force, and raw need make it a likely candidate for global war. It'll also bring new diseases to people relatively early on, potentially unearthing ancient ones that have been trapped in permafrost that we have no resistance to. Global warming will also kill us in other ways, but we'll likely rip ourselves apart in the earlier stages. I know a lot of people are bored of hearing that the destruction of the environment is the destruction of us, but that's really how it is. Story 20. Getting close to it right now. If the temperature changes too radically, most of the trees and crops will not fare too well. Widespread famine will turn into utter chaos. An apocalyptic scenario sounds pretty possible as a result of that. I mean, something like there is no rule of law except in closed-off cities. Think Mad Max, but no bombs. Although extreme famine like that sounds like a nuclear war could easily follow after due to a fight for resources like fresh water and land that can be farmed. I don't know. Seems like the most complicated scenario would be the most likely. Just a big old boom seems unreasonable. But then what do I know? Actually, aliens. Yeah, aliens. Story 21. People underestimate how close we've come to nuclear war before. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, the US used fake depth charges to tell Soviet submarines to turn back and leave. These weren't the kind that would actually harm the crew. The Soviet government was informed of it. However, one nuclear submarine was not, and they were depth charged. The crew was convinced the war had started because of this, so they voted to launch. All that stopped the sub from launching was one crew member who said they should surface and confirm with the USSR first, called Vasily Arkhipov. Of course, nothing was actually happening, but he basically saved the world. There have been many incidents like this, including launch detection software malfunctioning and detecting an enemy nuke. Story 22. There is a parasitic fungus that infects and takes over ants. It completely takes over motor control, moves the ant around, and produces unusual feeding behavior as well as unusually high feet of strength. There is evidence it has been around for around 48 million years. So a zombie outbreak is completely within the realm of scientific possibility. Most modern zombie mythos matches these fungi. Physical transmission, shying away from daylight, unusually high strength, higher aggression, and destroying the brain, the fungi, is the only way to kill it. Story 23. I don't think that someone's gonna make super rabies on purpose. There's no real gain in a disease that indiscriminately kills people and could infect the person releasing it without some sort of cure or vaccine. That said, on accident, someone could make some sort of super rabies. We already know that there are cases where a drug gets put onto the market and then we find out months or years later that the company either didn't do its due diligence or willfully covered up bad results in order to reach a deadline. Now imagine if GMO treatments got shoved onto the public and someone completely ignored some sort of deadly virus because the best results said it fixed something else. I'm not worried about the crazy screaming that they put jellyfish genes in the crops. I'm worried about the companies that will release genetically modified organisms but are really lazy doing it. On that note, countries like China really love their antibiotics, and in a country with billions of people, you might see a breeding ground for all sorts of biohazards that build strong resistance to drugs and then travel to countries not prepared to deal with them. Story 24. I thought that humans ultimately realizing that our entire existence is just a simulation would be a big deal, but the more I think about it, the more trivial it seems. Most of us would still opt to stay oblivious like the one guy from The Matrix. Below are my worst fears. Superbugs. While many are wisening up to the fact of antibiotic-resistant strains and reining in the rampant prescriptions, the rest of the world is pretty oblivious to the fact. And not just the antibiotic-resistant ones, there might even be a hitherto unencountered one hiding in some deep crevasse that would take over and bring the apocalypse. Climate change. Whether you believe or not in global warming, and frankly, you are a moron if you don't, climate change is happening. The worst thing is that it's extremely difficult to predict what the exact consequences would be. From rising sea levels to losing the permafrost and releasing huge quantities of methane, the possibilities are endless. We already have seen the level of crises a couple of wars can create. Just imagine the havoc that could be wreaked by the planet-wide ecological disaster. 3. Water shortage. Worldwide, we are experiencing tightening water availability. South Africa had a taste of that when one of its major cities ran out of water. I already am hearing of the worsening situation around the Colorado Basin. Countries in Asia have millions living in river basins and depending on water for agriculture. While I am sure that water shortage won't bring a worldwide apocalypse, it could still hurt the entire world a lot. 4. Nuclear war. Human idiocy is limitless. While most the nuclear arsenal around the world is fairly safe, we cannot discount the fact that somewhere in some corner of the world, a crazy person might lay her hands on a nuclear weapon and even use it. Though we might be able to contain a localized event, if that triggers something like the MAD system, we are all screwed. Story 25. Well, in actuality, many years into the future, the Earth is going to be burned and engulfed by the sun once it reaches the end of its lifespan. The Andromeda Galaxy is currently en route to make a collision with our galaxy. Technically, we do not know if there is a small black hole hanging out anywhere around us in our galaxy, since we can only see out of it. There have also been some close calls with giant meteors coming close to hitting Earth. In fact, there is an asteroid with a 70-meter diameter right now named Apophis that is expected to possibly collide with Earth in the next 20 years or so. Scientists and many others are also concerned about Yellowstone volcano since it has been starting to show swelling and minor activities. And as much as zombies sound fascinating, a really deadly virus could suddenly pop up and spread like the plague. The Earth is also supposedly close to starting another ice age, which would cause a food chain collapse, starting with marine life. The Earth is also way overdue for a magnetic pole flip, which many have theorized could either end up with a bit of chaos or cause annihilation. I could go on,